Most men think the markers of becoming a man are external: the job, the car, the relationship, the ability to provide. So they grind for those things and assume the rest of us arrive on schedule. It doesn't. They look around at 35 and realize something architectural is missing. A load-bearing capacity nobody told them about. A quiet competence other men seem to have inherited in their sleep. That's not weakness. That's the absence of training. There are 9 skills the modern world has quietly stopped teaching. Not Instagram skills. Not productivity podcast skills. Skills that determine whether a man holds his frame when life starts removing things from him, and which ones break him the moment pressure arrives. By skill 4, you'll recognize someone in your own life who fails it constantly. Maybe yourself. The sources for what follows aren't internet wisdom. They're buried in older books. Jack Donovan's The Way of Men, David Dida's writing on masculine polarity, Robert Bly's Iron John, Robert Greene, Marcus Aurelius, Jordan Peterson's clinical observations, and the training doctrines of organizations that select men for under genuine physical and psychological pressure. Different traditions, different centuries, same conclusion. A man's life will pivot repeatedly on a set of capacities most men never name out loud. Fail the test, and your life slowly arranges itself around the failure. The marriage, the career, the friendships, the health. Pass it, and you start to feel the thing older men sometimes describe with a single word: sovereignty. Not the cartoonish version, not the Instagram version, the quiet version, the kind that makes a room recalibrate when you walk in, even though you said nothing. Most men chase the wrong skills for 2 decades and never figure out why their life refuses to deepen. These are the 9 that determine the difference. The first is the foundation almost every other one rests on, and almost no man passes it by default. Skill 1. The deliberate disappointment of others. Approval seeking starts early and ends never for most men. Mom is happier when you behave. Teachers reward agreement. Friends reciprocate friendliness. Bosses promote agreeable men faster than disagreeable ones. By 25, the average man has spent 2 decades training one neural circuit at the expense of all others. The circuit that scans for approval and adjusts the self to receive it. This produces something psychologically grotesque. A man who can't say no without rehearsing the apology first. A man whose calendar is decided by other people's preferences. A man whose experiences another person's mild discomfort, as if it were a physical threat. There's a clinical term for this: sociotropic dependency, described by the psychiatrist Aaron Beck in the early 1980s as a pattern in which a person organizes their entire emotional regulation around the moods and opinions of others. Beck found it correlated heavily with depression, with anxiety, with chronic indecision. Not coincidentally, a man who can't disappoint anyone slowly disappears. The skill is not rudeness. Rudeness is just inverted approval seeking. A man so afraid of being controlled that he overcorrects into hostility. That isn't sovereignty. That's the same wound running in reverse. The skill is the willingness to deliver an unwelcome answer in a steady voice and not soften it afterward. You watch the other person's face fall. You don't rush to repair it. You let no exist in the room without renovation. No second sentence. No softening laugh. No, but maybe later. Just the answer, then a pause, then the next subject. A man who can do this 5 times in a single week notices something within a month. Other people start treating him differently. They stop testing him. They start consulting him. The dynamic shifts because he stopped negotiating his own boundaries with himself in front of them. This is the foundation. Every skill that follows is impossible without it. The man who cannot say no cannot be honest. The man who cannot be honest cannot be trusted, least of all by himself. Skill 2. Precognitive betrayal detection. Robert Greene calls it the law of compulsive behavior. People telegraph who they're about to become long before they become it. Most men miss it because they're focused on what's being said. Greene's framing was sharper. That human character is essentially a pattern, and the pattern always shows itself in micro events that look insignificant in the moment. The friend who jokes about your weak point one too many times. The colleague who suddenly stops asking how your project is going. The partner whose praise becomes generic. The boss who copies others on emails they used to send only to you. Each of these, in isolation, means nothing. Together they form a trajectory. The skill is statistical, not paranoid, statistical. You're noticing a base rate change in someone's behavior toward you. You're tracking deviations from the previous baseline. Most betrayals in adult life are not surprises. They are confirmations of signals the man chose to ignore for 6 or 8 or 12 months, because acknowledging them would have required action. Researchers studying victims of long-running confidence schemes, people defrauded by trusted figures over years, find that the victims, post-mortem, almost always remember the warning signs. A small lie, a canceled commitment, an unexplained gap in a story, a reaction that didn't match the situation. They remember every signal. They explained each one away in the moment. The skill is closing the gap between detection and acknowledgement. You don't confront. You don't withdraw dramatically. You don't accuse anyone of anything. You simply update your internal map of who that person is and how much access they have to you. A man who reads the betrayal 4 months early has 4 months to position himself. He can change roles before the firing, move on emotionally before the relationship ends, diversify the friendship before the rupture. A man who reads it the day it lands has nothing. The skill is not paranoia. The skill is finally believing what people have been telling you about themselves all along, without you having to be told twice. Skill 3. Calibrated aggression. Jack Donovan, in The Way of Men, makes a claim that almost all modern self-help dances around. Civilization is built on top of organized male violence, and a man who has surgically removed any capacity for aggression has not become more evolved. He has become less useful to the people he loves and easier to push around by people who haven't bothered with the same surgery. The skill is not being aggressive. Aggressive men are common and most of them are losing, slowly in inexpensive ways. The skill is calibration, possessing the capacity, controlling its release, signaling its existence without ever needing to demonstrate it. Researcher Jessica Tracy at the University of British Columbia, in collaboration with David Matsumoto, mapped what's now called the pride display, a posture humans across cultures unconsciously adopt to signal status. Chest open, arms slightly away from the body, chin neutral. The study found that observers rated men in this posture as more competent and higher status within milliseconds before any words were exchanged. The signal was registered preconsciously across cultures, including in populations with no exposure to Western media. That's the surface mechanism. The deeper one is older. Other males, including primates, read for capacity, not for what you'll do, for what you could do if pushed. The man who has never struck anyone, but who clearly could, is treated differently than the man whose body announces, in posture and movement, that he never has and never will. This is uncomfortable to write because the modern world prefers the second man. The modern world also depends on the first. The skill is to be capable of harm and to never need it. Most men are one or the other. The aggressive man is capable but uncontrolled. The agreeable man is controlled but incapable. Few men have done the work to be both, physically trained, psychologically grounded, and entirely different to whether the moment requires action or stillness. A man like that doesn't need to talk loudly in a room. The room organizes around him before he said his second sentence. That's not charisma, that's calibration. And the modern man does not learn it by accident. Skill 4, sitting with the wound. Robert Bly's Iron John, written in 1990, drew on a single grim fairy tale to make an argument that quietly rearranged how a generation of men understood their own pain. Bly's claim: every man carries a wound, usually inflicted in childhood, usually by a father who was absent or angry or simply silent, and most men spend their adult lives running from it. They run into work, they run into danger, they run into women, they run into substances, they run into the construction of an exterior so impressive that no one will ever find the wound underneath. The skill is sitting with it, not therapeutically, not for 30 minutes a week, properly, long enough to feel its actual shape, long enough that you can stop confusing it with your personality. Carl Jung described this work as shadow integration, the process of acknowledging the parts of yourself you've disowned, the rage, the envy, the fear, the smallness, the parts the conscious self refuses to claim. Jung's clinical observation, replicated repeatedly in-depth psychology since, was that disowned parts of the self do not disappear. They run the show from underneath. They choose your reactions when you're tired. They pick your partners when you're lonely. They sabotage what you most want when it's almost in your hand. A man who has not sat with his wound will recreate it. He will choose partners who replicate the original injury. The cold father becomes the cold girlfriend, becomes the cold wife. He will feel inexplicable rage at moments that don't deserve it. He will sabotage offers that should have been the breakthrough. The wound, unexamined, is a private dictator. This is the most uncomfortable skill on this list because it implicates the man personally. Most of what looks like bad luck in a man's emotional life is actually unfinished business with something he refuses to look at directly. The skill is the looking. Bly wrote that until a man has descended into his own grief and stayed there long enough to learn what lived inside it, he cannot truly stand up, because the part of him doing the standing isn't him. It's the construct he built to avoid descending. You cannot rebuild a foundation by painting the walls. You rebuild by going underneath. Skill 5. Decision velocity in fog. Pause. There's a phrase Navy SEAL instructors use during selection. Paralysis is a decision. Recruits standing in surf at 3 in the morning, exhausted, presented with a choice. The wrong move is fast, but the slowest move is fatal. Selection isn't measuring intelligence, it's measuring how a man's decision-making degrades under physiological collapse. This was formalized decades earlier by Colonel John Boyd, the Air Force fighter pilot who developed what's now called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. Boyd's insight, born from analyzing dogfights in Korea, was that the pilot who completed the cycle faster than his opponent didn't just win, he forced his opponent into a permanent state of reaction. The slower man wasn't fighting anymore. He was responding to a fight that had already ended in someone else's mind. Boyd's framework was later adopted by military planners, business strategists, and trial lawyers. Anywhere, the speed of decision under uncertainty mattered more than the polish of the decision itself. Most men are dying inside slow loops and don't know they're in one. A boss criticizes them in a meeting. They freeze. They replay it for days. They craft the perfect response in the shower, weeks too late, and never actually deliver it. The OODA-trained man responds in the room, calmly, in 9 seconds, with 1 sentence. He doesn't need it to be perfect. He needs it to be present. A relationship enters a difficult stretch. Most men stall. They're hoping it resolves itself. They wait. They ask friends. They run hypothetical scenarios. The skill is the willingness to make a decisive call with 60% of the information, knowing the remaining 40% will only arrive after you act. A career stalls. Most men wait for someone to notice. The decisive man chooses an exit door before the building catches fire. Boyd's principle: the decision made now beats the perfect decision made later, almost always in almost every domain. This isn't recklessness. Recklessness is acting without observing. The OODA man observes faster, orients faster, and is willing to act before certainty arrives. Certainty almost never arrives in the situations that actually matter. The man who waits for it loses by inches across years and never identifies the mechanism. The skill is closing your loops, then closing them again, then closing them faster. 3 of the men who survived the longest in Auschwitz, documented by the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived alongside them, shared something the strongest prisoners didn't always have. They had something to come back to: a wife not yet found again, a book not yet finished, a child not yet seen. Frankl, watching this from inside the camp, formed the hypothesis that became the man's search for meaning. Men do not break from suffering. They break from suffering without meaning. Strength is relevant past a certain threshold. Some of the most physically capable men in the camps died first. Frankl observed that men who lost their internal why, even men who'd been physically robust, collapsed inward within days. The body followed the mind. There was a rhythm to it he learned to predict. The skill is constructing a why deliberately, in advance, before you need it. This is one of the most counterintuitive skills on the list because most men assume meaning will arrive naturally, through achievement, through love, through accumulated experience. It doesn't always. For some men, it never does. And the man who reaches a difficult chapter without a constructed meaning will find himself unable to endure ordinary frustration, let alone real loss. Somewhere in most men's lives, the external scaffolding fails. The job ends. The relationship breaks. The body weakens. The friends drift. The man with no constructed meaning experiences this as the end of his identity. The man who has done the construction experiences it as a chapter break, painful but survivable. This is not optimism. Optimism is fragile. Optimism crumbles the moment reality refuses to cooperate. Frankl was specific. The men who survived weren't the ones who believed everything would be fine. They were the ones who had decided in advance that they would refuse to surrender, even if everything else was taken. That refusal is meaning. For one man, it was returning to his wife. For another, the unfinished manuscript. For another, the obligation he felt to one specific friend. The content didn't matter. The structure did. Most men don't construct this until they're forced to. Most men, when forced to, can't construct it under pressure. The skill is building it now, when nothing has gone wrong yet, so that when something does, you have somewhere to stand that isn't the ground that just collapsed. Frankl wrote that he survived not because he was strong, but because he had something undelivered. That's the skill. Maintaining something undelivered, always. Skill 7, reading hierarchy in 90 seconds. A shift in tone. We move from inward work to colder craft. Robert Sapolsky, the Stanford neurobiologist, spent 30 years studying baboon troops in Kenya. His central finding replicated across primate species. Every group, including human groups, organizes itself into a hierarchy within minutes of forming. The hierarchy is real, even when the participants pretend it isn't. It changes who eats first, who is touched, who is interrupted, who is believed when two stories conflict. Most men walk into rooms and read the hierarchy wrong because they read the wrong signals. They watch for who talks the most. The most talking man is rarely the highest status man. He's often the most insecure. They watch for who dresses best. Status often dresses down on purpose because dressing down is itself a status signal in the right rooms. They watch for who's loudest. The truly dominant man in any room is usually the calmest one in it. Sapolsky's research, mirrored in human studies by behavioral scientists like Vanessa Van Edwards and earlier sociologists studying group dynamics, found that the actual signals are subtler. Who do people glance at when something funny is said, before they laugh? Who interrupts whom and gets away with it? Who can leave the conversation without it dissolving? Who is touched casually, and who is given physical space? Who responds first when a question is asked of the group? Whose silence, when they don't respond, gets noticed? These signals reveal the actual ranking in under 2 minutes, if you know what to watch for. The skill is reading the ranking and then choosing your position in it deliberately, not contesting it, not submitting to it, choosing. Most men submit by accident. They walk into a room and adjust their behavior to fit the existing hierarchy without realizing they're doing it. They go quieter near the dominant man. They laugh harder at his jokes than they want to. They self-suppress in ways they can't articulate later. The man who has trained this skill walks into the same room and notices the hierarchy in 90 seconds. Then he decides, based on his own goals, not on social gravity, how he intends to position himself in the next 40 minutes. Sometimes the play is to defer fully and intentionally. Sometimes the play is to refuse to defer and let the room recalibrate around that refusal. The point is the choosing. The point is being awake to the field, instead of being moved through it. Most men spend their entire lives being moved. Skill 8, strategic surrender. This is the skill that reads as cowardice and is precisely the opposite. The Byzantine general Belisarius, one of the greatest tacticians in late Roman military history, was known for something his enemies couldn't understand. He would sometimes withdraw from positions he could have held. He would yield ground when his legion was prepared to die holding it. His own officers occasionally accused him of weakness. They wanted glory. He wanted victory. And he understood, before most men in his century did, that those are not the same thing. Then they watched him win wars his predecessor had lost. Belisarius understood something most men never learn. The loss of a thing on purpose is almost always cheaper than the loss of a large thing by accident. Robert Greene built one of the laws in the 33 Strategies of War around this: the deliberate sacrifice of pride, position, or short-term reputation to preserve something structural that would otherwise be at risk. Most men can't do this. Their ego is fused to their position. To yield ground feels neurologically identical to being attacked, so they hold positions they should have abandoned 6 months ago. In arguments, in jobs, in relationships, in friendships, in business decisions, in old grievances they're paying interest on every week. The behavioral writers Chip and Dan Heath, in their book Decisive, summarize research showing that managers who could publicly admit a sunk cost error and reverse course outperform managers who couldn't by significant margins. The data was unambiguous. The behavior was rare. The barrier wasn't intelligence. The barrier was ego. The skill is treating the position you currently occupy as one of many possible positions, not as your identity. The skill is the ability to lose deliberately, to say, you were right, I was wrong, I'm changing course, without that admission costing you more than the alternative would have cost. A man who has never lost on purpose is a man who will eventually lose by accident, at much higher cost, with much wider consequence. There's an inverted form of this most men don't notice. Some of the strongest men in any room are men who've yielded the most ground in their lives. They yielded it strategically, on their terms, before someone forced their hand. They look soft from the outside. From the inside, they're operating with a clarity most men never reach. A man who is afraid to lose anything will, over time, lose everything in slow motion. The skill is choosing what to lose, and when, and to whom. Skill 9, outliving your own ego. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, commander of armies, the most powerful man alive in his own lifetime, wrote a private journal he never intended anyone to read. Meditations. Sentence after sentence in it is some version of the same instruction to himself. You are nothing. You will be forgotten. The praise you receive is air. The criticism you receive is air. Stop reacting to either. This was not depression. This was training. The skill is the willingness to live below your own reputation, to act in alignment with what you believe is correct in the absence of any audience, with full awareness that the audience, when it appears, will misjudge you in both directions. It will overestimate you sometimes. It will underestimate you sometimes. Both estimations are equally irrelevant to the work. Most men cannot do this. They live for the audience. They optimize their decisions for how the decision will look, not for whether the decision is right. They burn enormous psychological energy maintaining a public self, a self designed for an audience that, in most cases, isn't even watching. There is a measurable cost to this. Researchers studying what's called self-monitoring behavior, work originating with the psychologist Mark Snyder in the 1970s, found that self-monitors, people who continuously adjust themselves to the perceived expectation of others, experience higher rates of anxiety, lower long-term self-satisfaction, and shallower long-term relationships than low self-monitors. The constant calibration depletes them. The performance becomes who they are. Eventually, they don't know what they actually think, only what their imagined audience wants to hear them think. The Stoics understood this without the data. Marcus wrote in his journal, "The opinion of 10,000 is worth less than the opinion of one man who has actually thought about the question." Epictetus, the slave-turned-philosopher, said something nearly identical 4 generations earlier. The skill is becoming the man who thinks for himself even when no one is watching, and especially when many are. This skill takes years. There is no shortcut. The first few times a man tries to act in defiance of his audience, he will feel physically uncomfortable. The discomfort is the muscle developing. Most men quit at this stage and conclude the audience was right all along. A man who can do this for 10 years stops needing to be understood. The need itself dissolves. He acts, he moves, he builds. The audience updates around him or doesn't, and either outcome is accepted with the same expression on his face. This is the rarest masculine state in the modern world. Look at the 9 skills together and notice something the modern world doesn't advertise. None of them are skills the world rewards in the short term. None produce visible markers in the first 30 days. None photograph well. Disappointing people on purpose. Reading betrayal 4 months early. Calibrating aggression. Sitting with the wound. Deciding inside fog. Holding meaning when meaning is collapsing. Reading hierarchy without contesting it. Surrendering on purpose. Outliving your own ego. These are quiet skills. They are not Instagram skills. Not productivity podcast skills. Not bro science skills. They are the skills that determine whether a man at 55 looks back at his life and feels he was the author of it, or feels he was something more like a passenger. There is no curriculum for these. No school teaches them. Most fathers can't model what they don't possess. This is why 95% of men go without them. Not because they're weak, but because the architecture for transmitting them collapsed somewhere between their grandfather and them. The signal got lost in transmission. The repair is private. It happens one decision at a time, mostly in moments no one will witness or applaud. The man you become through this is not the man who looks impressive on a profile. He's the man others quietly seek out when their own lives start coming apart, because they sense, without being able to name it, that something in him is structurally different. That is the payoff. Not status, not admiration. Quiet, structural difference. Watch yourself this week. See which of the 9 you fail. Don't try to fix all of them. Pick one. Sit with the failure long enough that it stops being theoretical. If something here rearrange how you see yourself, subscribe. The men who need writing like this tend to find it. We'd rather write for the men who want it than the men who don't.